Namaste. On behalf of the AYUDH family, wishing all our viewers a very hearty welcome to yet another episode of the 9-part series of talks on the divinity of motherhood and women empowerment. I'm Aarti Pradeep from AYUDH, and I would be your host for the day. AYUDH is dedicated to empowering young people to perpetuate natural harmony, social justice, and personal empowerment. At AYUDH, we derive our inspiration from the world-renowned humanitarian leader, Sri Mata Amritandamayi Devi, lovingly known as Amma. India is a land where women have been honored and respected. Our culture recognizes the fact that an empowered woman can uplift not just herself, but her family, society, and a nation at large. In Indian culture, women are seen as an epitome of love, compassion, selfless sacrifice, and strength. But unfortunately, women have also been victims to wrong traditions and practices that have crept into our society over a period of foreign influence. Lots of reforms have come into being at a social, political, and judicial level to advance gender equality, but more needs to be done at a grassroots level. Amma has been tirelessly working to empowering women over the past few decades. Her life is a remarkable inspiration for every woman around the world. Amma is an embodiment of an empowered being who inspires millions through her awakened motherhood. Through this 9-part series of talks, AYUDH hopes to bring different perspectives related to women empowerment by 9 women who've had the good fortune to be closely associated with Amma. Before I introduce you to today's guest, I would request Amrita Chaitanya ji, who's Amma's disciple and also one of the national coordinators for AYUDH, to kindly begin this session with a prayer and impart some words of wisdom. Namaskar, Samji.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aarti. Namaskar, everyone. Let's do it. Oh, Dhyayamo Dhalabhunthanavati Tejomai Naisthiki Snigdha Pangavilokini Bhagavati Mandasmita Shri Mukhi Vatsalyamritavarshini Sumadhuram Sankirtana Lapini Shyamangi Madhusikta Suktim Amritanandatmikam Ishwari Om Amriteshwari Namah. Dear friends, in 2002, Amma was presented with the Gandhi King Award for Nonviolence, given in recognition for her lifelong work in furthering the principles of nonviolence. Let me share a few sentences from Amma's keynote address during the event at the UN headquarters in Geneva at the Global Peace Initiative of Women, Religious and Spiritual Leaders. Amma said, and I quote, "The right circumstances and support of others will certainly help women to awaken and arise, but women must draw inspiration from those circumstances and find strength within themselves. Real power and strength don't come from outside. They are to be found within. Courage is an attribute of the mind. It is not a quality of the body. Women have to find their courage. They have the power to fight against the social rules that prevent their progress. This is Amma's own experience. Until recently, women were not allowed to worship in the inner sanctum of a temple, nor could women consecrate a temple or perform Vedic rituals or chant Vedic mantras. But Amma is encouraging and empowering women to do these things. And it is Amma who performs the consecration ceremony in all the temples that we as ashram build. So there were many those who protested against women doing these kind of things, but for generations, all those ceremonies and rituals, because they have been done only by men, to those who questioned what we were doing, Amma said that we are worshipping a God who is beyond all differences, who does not differentiate between male and female. And as it turns out, majority of people have supported this revolutionary move. Those prohibitions against women were never actually a part of ancient Hindu tradition. they were in all likelihood invented later by men who belonged to a higher class of society in order to exploit and oppress the woman. So with that message of Amma, let me extend my best wishes once again to the IYUDH team for organizing these talks. Thanks to Aarti, and my thanks as well as best wishes to today's very, very special guest speaker. Thank you for inviting me. Namaste. Over to you, Aarti.
Thank you, Swamiji, for those enlightening words. Now, it's time to introduce you to our very special guest here today. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Priya Nair, Assistant Professor of Gastroenterology, serving at Amrita Hospital, Kochi. Welcome, Dr. Priya.
Namaste.
Dr. Priya Nair is Assistant Professor of Gastroenterology at Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences, Kochi. She's an alumnus of both Amrita School of Medicine and Amrita Vishwavidyapeetham, where she completed her MBBS, MD in Internal Medicine, DM in Gastroenterology. She was a distinction holder in MBBS, a gold medalist in DM in Gastro. Presently, Dr. Priya's main area of work is related to liver and pancreas endoscopy, for which she's received many grants for furthering her research in this field. She's involved with many translational research projects, including creating a database of patients with bile and duct cancer using geographic information systems, artificial intelligence in endoscopy, and chemotherapeutic drug-eluting stents for palliative cancer care. She's had the good fortune of growing under Amma's guidance since she was just 4 years old. She's been blessed with the opportunity to travel with Amma on all her foreign tours for the past 30 years. She's been translating Amma's speeches at various international forums, such as the United Nations International Summit for World Religions, and so on. Thank you, Dr. Priya, for taking time out and gracing us with your presence here today. As we begin this session, I would request all our viewers to post their questions on the YouTube live chat. Dr. Priya, with your permission, if I may proceed.
Sure, yeah.
So let's begin. So the first question is, what do you think are the changes needed in the society that can really empower us as women?
So good morning to everyone. At the outset, I would like to say that I am truly honored to be here today. I have been listening to all the speakers who've gone before me in this series, and I have to make a disclaimer. I haven't really worked exclusively in the field of women empowerment, nor do I have any particular degree in this. All I have is my own limited perspective. But what I can say with confidence is that I've had the fortune to virtually see true women empowerment in action. Our most beloved Amma is the epitome of motherhood. As Jane Goodall stated, Amma is God's love in a human form, in the form of a woman. So my perspective on women empowerment is based purely on what I have witnessed from living with Amma. So with regards to societal changes, I think we've had a lot of discussion regarding the need for strictly enforced legislature. And we're all happy to see that these changes are gradually being brought into our systems. We may have a long way to go, but we are on the right path. As already discussed with us in the first talk, I believe it was the first talk on women empowerment by Srimati Sundari Nandaji, our government has made significant strides on this front and continues to do so. But I feel that the need of the hour is something a little even more vital than any kind of legislature or law. What we really need is a change in behavior. We need to develop an environment of mutual respect, because today society seems inherently incapable of respecting men and women equally. It's not only that men see themselves as superior, but it's also that women see themselves as inferior. It goes both ways. And I think that this has become so ingrained into our culture, into our way of thinking. In fact, it's even become part and parcel of our faith and belief systems. Just to give you an example, I was born in the United States. So when I was born, my grandfather had come from India to spend some time with us, and he you found out that his first his grandchild was a daughter, was a girl, and he was obviously very happy that the baby was healthy, and that he was very happy about that. But he made a passing statement to my mother, and she just recently told me about that, where he said, anyway, now that you have a baby girl, I guess in this lifetime you won't be able to attain the ultimate goal of life, heaven. Moksha was the word he had used at that time. So back then, my mother, she didn't really have any exposure to spirituality much. They were living in the US, and she was confused. She was like, I don't really understand. Like, what is it? I don't understand what you're saying. And he said, no, only if you have a boy as your first child will you actually ever be able to attain true happiness in the ultimate sense of the goal of life. I mean, if you really look at it, he was a very well educated, highly qualified person, not from, a lower socioeconomic strata of society or anything. He was not only that, he was very well versed in scriptures of Sanatana Dharma. But the problem is that this fundamental feeling of gender inequality is so deeply ingrained inside people. And consciously or subconsciously, it kind of percolates into all spheres of life, whether it's family life, professional life, day-to-day transactions. Because at the end of the day, all our actions are reflections of our mind. So when such thoughts lay deep within, it's natural for the world outside us to reflect this equality in all different kinds of ways. And like Mokshamrita Swami said in the beginning, it's something that has developed over time. Because if we look at ancient texts of Sanatana Dharma, if we look at history, we'll see that this inequality didn't exist before. Especially in our own culture, women were given a much greater status than men. We're all familiar with the chant Matra Devo Bhava. Mothers are the very first form of God. And we ourselves have misconceptions about our own culture. We feel that women were not educated, women didn't have the freedom to make decisions regarding their own lives, which is actually not true. Because in Vedic times, in ancient times, in our own cultures, women were given education just like men. Women had sacred thread ceremonies, which is why even today in temples, you'll see that the female deities, the women on the walls and the all parts of the temple, they have sacred threads. The woman selected the husband, not vice versa. And our scriptures are literally studded with examples of women who were legendary teachers of their times. They were scholars, they ran gurukulas or schools for women. So from that extent, gradually over time, this core value of equality was replaced by man-made status levels. And this inequality and discrimination gradually deepened. And women themselves lost their own self-confidence and became completely dependent upon men, either economically, emotionally, especially in the lower levels of society. So I feel that we can strengthen legislation. We certainly should do so. But for true transformation to take place, I think that individuals need to change. And in this regard, I feel that Amma runs the perfect program for women empowerment. Amma has worked miracles in society. Like already Mokshamrita ji mentioned, women do homas now. Women even do last rites for their parents when they're the only children. Women, especially in Amma's organization, they run so many of the different schools, universities. I mean, you've heard from all the women who spoke before. And it's truly phenomenal to watch women transform into independent and strong individuals. In Amrita Hospital where I work, there are many volunteer workers, and these workers are mainly women, and they come from really impoverished backgrounds, often backgrounds of abuse and violence. And Amma takes them in, and they're given shelter and food and stable work. most of them, I think they don't have any education or vocational training, so they're trained while they work in the hospital. And the younger ones, without having to pay any fees, they're put in courses like lab technicians or endoscopy technicians, and they get trained so they can live independently with fear. And they go to see Amma on weekends. I mean, not now because of COVID, but before. And I used to like to sit next to Amma's chair when they would come for darshan and interact with Amma, because the love that Amma showers on them and that confidence that she instills in them, that there's nothing in this world that can prevent you from achieving what you truly put your mind to. It really brings tears to your eyes when you watch it. So I feel that this individual centric form of women empowerment, this compassion and love driven women empowerment from down up, not reverse, is one of the only ways to create true and lasting change.
Thank you, Dr. Priya. That is a very informative and a very structured way of putting things, and how traditionally our culture did support women. Most of us are not aware of things that you mentioned about the ceremonies that women used to conduct and the kind of strength that we had historically, and how it has diminished over the past, and how we as women should be the change makers for our own change. And of course, how Amma really helps us and supports us mentally to be better human beings, and to make us believe that there is nothing that we can't achieve. So moving on, I think this question would be very dear to you. What kind of impact has proximity to Amma and Amma's teachings have had on your personality as well as your personal life and your professional life, of course?
That's a very vast question to answer, but I'll try to be brief. I think that if you ask anyone how Amma has impacted their lives, the one thing I think everybody will say is compassion. Many people watching, you've probably witnessed Amma gives darshan, and watching Amma embrace people is literally, it's a tireless, endless compassion that kind of pours out of each and every cell of her being. I met Amma when I was 3 years old, and I don't have so much memory of that. And when you see something regularly every day from that age, you kind of take it for granted. So I didn't really see the miracle that mere action of darshan is, But I remember watching darshan, and I would notice something, even when I was young, more than the compassion and, all the seemingly endless energy. The thing that I noticed was joy. Amma's constant state of almost infectious happiness. And as a child, I couldn't understand how somebody would sit for 12 hours, wouldn't even get to go to the bathroom, but they could be so, eternally happy. So I remember on my 10th birthday, I went for darshan. Amma was in Holland, Europe at that point of time. And I brought Amma a piece of my birthday cake. So Amma was in the middle of darshan, and she put the cake to the side. And I kind of was irritated that Amma didn't eat my cake. So I said, aren't you hungry? Eat my cake. I get really angry when I don't get to, eat and I'm hungry. So I'm sure if you eat this cake, you'll be happy. That was my opinion that I wanted to tell Amma when I was young. So Amma kind of laughed at me, and she said, cake? Okay, fine. If it makes you happy, I'll take a piece. But Amma's happiness isn't in the cake or any other kind of food. Amma's happiness is in giving comfort and happiness to others. And then Amma said, you should try it. Once you try it, you will understand that by giving to others, you will attain more happiness than any birthday cake could ever give you. And I think that particular example that Amma sets, or that particular inspiration that Amma awakens in people, is probably one of the many aspects that I feel professionally especially has really affected me. I think there would be no end to this discussion if I begin to talk about all the ways Amma has influenced me. Because if I'm anything today, it is solely because of Amma's compassionate grace, constant guidance and inspiration. But on a professional level, I think the concept of giving is something that has really shaped my experience of being a doctor. As we all know, medicine is part of the service industry, but it's often very dry, like many fields of education. And we spend 10, 15 years studying and piling on degrees. And when we finally finish and practice, then we become focused on, earning back what we spent on the education. And practice becomes very transactional, like any other business. And then you add long hours and stress, and finally people burn out. But my experience has been very different, and I think I know it is solely because of Amma's example. The joy of giving and experiencing the happiness of others is something that any contact with Amma kind of naturally awakens that within you. So just to give a little example, I used to spend every Onam. For those who may not know what Onam is, it's like the Pongal or the Magara Sankranti kind of equivalent in Kerala. It's like the harvest festival. It's all about food and being with family, and I loved Onam. It was a very exciting time in the ashram. And when I was doing my general medicine PG, I was put on duty on Onam. And it was the first time that I couldn't spend time with Amma, and I was really angry at my professors and colleagues, and I thought they should understand that I need to go on Onam. As you mentioned in the beginning, one of my greatest blessings has been I've been given the opportunity to help translate Amma's words into English for some of Amma's speeches. So on the night before Onam, I was sent a file to translate. And one of the lines that Amma had written was, the easiest way to rid yourself of anger and sorrow is to serve another in need, because the joy you bring to the heart of another fills your heart with even more joy. So the next day, I didn't pay much attention to that while I was translating it. But the next day I went for lunch, thinking of everyone else celebrating there. And after I ate, they gave me a glass of payasam, the sweet rice pudding that you get on Onam. So I suddenly thought, I wonder if my patients got any Onam payasam. I don't know if they probably also didn't get anything. So I was anyway going back to the ward, and I thought I'd take a bottle of payasam back to give some of my patients. And there were hardly 10 of them there in that ward, and I just gave a tiny glass to them. It was no effort, but the expression on their faces was something I will never forget. There was one man who began to cry, and for a split second I thought was he in pain, but he began to narrate how his family's kind of left him in the hospital because they don't want to deal with taking care of him, and they hadn't even called to wish him a happy Onam. And I told him that I usually am not there, but because I couldn't go to the ashram for prasad, I am here, and I thought I'd bring this. And he said, because you didn't go to the ashram, Amma gave this payasam to me through you. And seeing that few minutes of happiness they had, all my anger and resentment just kind of disappeared. It melted away. And I was filled with just so much contentment and peace and happiness. And I have to say that when I look back at all the Onam celebrations I've spent with or without Amma, I think that this was probably the happiest Onam celebration I ever had. And I think that this is just one example of this countless times that Amma blesses us with that tiny glimpse of that joy that she experiences, that eternal joy of selflessness. Amma tells us that it's not the big things, graduations, wedding, buying a new house, car. These are not our big achievements or accomplishments in life. In fact, the small little ways you give a soul a little bit of happiness. You wipe a tear, you feed someone who's hungry, you help someone up who's fallen. Those are actually our greatest achievements. And I think this is one way that Amma influences thousands of people that come to her, because this kind of happiness cannot come from any kind of object. this ability to find joy in giving is something that brings so much light and purpose to our individual lives. And this compassion is the concept of motherhood. That is the true nature of women empowerment. Because Amma says that motherhood, she said this, I think, in the Geneva United Nations speech that Mokshamrita ji spoke about. Motherhood is not something that belongs to women. Both men and women alike have this motherhood within them, and that's what we have to awaken. But as women, we do have an added advantage because this quality of motherhood is inbuilt in us. And Amma encourages us to work in this competitive corporate world while simultaneously, flavoring all our actions with that sweetness of compassion. So yeah, it's an endless thing to speak about how Amma influences us, but I'll stop there.
No, I think like you rightly said, I hope men can also imbibe feminine qualities
Yes.
along with masculine qualities, especially the quality of motherhood, to bring the true sense of humanity to life and to serve others and to find that small joy of giving. We've all experienced it in a very small, subtle way, the constant bliss that Amma always experiences. But I hope Amma gives us the strength to do small, small things on a day-to-day basis to experience that bliss. Moving on to the next question. Did you ever face any gender biases being a woman? And did you really succumb to them or did you overcome them? If yes, then how?
To be honest with you, I cannot say honestly that I've experienced too much gender bias. I came to the ashram when I was 4 years old, and the ashram, you can imagine when the inspiration is someone like Amma, it's very unlikely that you'll be in an environment where there's any kind of significant gender bias. Even on a smaller level, like in the family unit, I think that if at all, I have a younger brother, if at all I was preferred over him. So I cannot really say that from childhood I definitely never experienced any kind of bias. There were differences, don't get me wrong. um, there were differences in the way me and my brother were treated, in the sense that I was far more sheltered. My every step was kind of monitored to make sure that I would be safe. My mother watched me like a hawk, watches its fledgling. My brother was also watched, but less than me for sure, because I think there was this undertone of fear for my safety that wasn't really because of any kind of gender bias on the side of my parents, but it's mainly because society today is much less safe for women than it is for men. And that's something that is a well-known fact um, all over the world. It's always less safe for women than men. But some of these realities of society started to set in when I went to college. I remember in my first year of medical school, I was attracted to being a surgeon. And Amma would encourage me all the time, and she would say, yeah, you should become a brain surgeon or a heart surgeon. And I once told one of my senior surgery professors that I aspired to be like him professionally, obviously. So he looked at me for a second and he said, really, you, a surgeon, are you sure? I think that it might be too difficult for you. Surgery should ideally be done by men. And also the stress, as a woman, I don't think you will be able to tolerate that kind of level of stress. And he started to say, why don't you take a lighter field like pathology or be an eye doctor or something like that, and it'll be easier for you. So naturally, I was really offended because that was somebody that I'd looked up to a lot. And I thought that, someday I might become his a student. So later, when I went to the ashram, I told Amma, and obviously Amma immediately discredited what he said and said that definitely you should become a brain surgeon and you should prove that, there's nothing that you can't do. So I kind of held on to that thought process. However, later on, when I graduated MBBS, you start to understand more about the field, and my liking changed, and I felt more inclined to do medicine, internal medicine. But I felt bad somewhere inside me. I thought that, am I letting Amma down, or am I letting womankind down by not being a surgeon and proving it to the world? So I asked Amma, I said, what should I do? Amma said, you should do what you like to do, because otherwise you won't be able to do it well. So I kind of asked Amma, but should I be a surgeon? I can be a good surgeon, but should I just prove that I can be a woman and a great surgeon and head of department and all these things? I told Amma, and Amma, she kind of started laughing. And she said something which I think is really pertinent in this particular discussion. She said, you should never feel the need to prove to the world that you can do any particular action better than a man. Instead, you should always strive to prove that you can do any action like a perfect woman. It is not the action that has to be perfected, but the person who performs the action that needs to become perfect. So I think that this particular discussion with Amma was a really important lesson, because women empowerment should not be about women trying to become like men. That's what we see today in that fight to attain so-called external equality. You see us almost trying to take the same roles, same positions as men, but instead it should be about women trying to become the perfect versions of themselves, because at the end of the day, physically men cannot become women and women cannot become men. That's a difference that is in our genetics. Means just as there are obvious physical differences between the genders, there are some inherent personality differences as well, like qualities like Amma says, love, compassion, patience, forbearance, tolerance, sacrifice. These are all qualities that are inherent in females, whereas males also have their own inherent strengths: bravery, self-confidence, independence, innovation, assertion. These are assigned as masculine tendencies, and these differences need to be respected because they both have their place. So to be balanced and successful individuals in society, we need to be able to have a balance between both feminine and masculine qualities within us and play to our own strengths. Otherwise, any attempt at competing with men by trying to become like them, that kind of leads to more disharmony in society.
Right, Dr. Priya. So, like you rightly said, I hope we as women can strive to be better versions of ourselves and try to do that every single day. Moving on to the next question. As a doctor, do you think the non-disclosure of the sex of the fetus has actually brought down the female infanticide rate in this country? And what do you think is the root cause of female infanticide? Is it because of the prevailing patriarchy in our society? Is it fear of dowry? Or is it something else? What is your opinion on this, Dr. Priya?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. Indian legislature is known to be quite expansive in its viewpoint, but this is a very good example of how legislature is not being enforced. It's a failure of enforcing legislature, because there are very, very strict rules regarding non-disclosure of gender of the unborn child. But this rule is constantly violated by small clinics, even by larger centers. In spite of all the laws and potential punishment out there, it's something that's very common and people don't like to talk about it, but I mean, it can't be avoided either. It's sad because India accounts for 1/3 of the total missing females in the world. Now I think according to the 2020 statistics, there are around 4.5 crore females missing in the Indian demography in 2020. So this is because of pre and post birth gender selection. I was recently speaking to a friend of mine who works with Dr. Bhavani Rao. She had spoken in one of the previous sessions. So she was telling me about a particular study that was done on this issue. And the study showed that where in families where there was a female head of the family over 40 years of age, so a mature female head of the household, there was an increased tendency for male preference in those households. So this is interesting because it goes to show that women are the strongest oppressors of women, because women perpetuate female subjugation or female inferiority through the next generations. And when they looked into reasons why this might be the case, they found that, you know, women, they feel that they had to suffer through it. They were raised in an environment of fear, so the next generation should also kind of suffer through that. So another aspect that the study brought out was that education, whether it was formal or informal education like media, TV, etc., or an educated woman had significantly less was less likely to have a male preference. So it's sad. It's not just about men not respecting women. It's about women also not respecting women. Because the fact is that women are sometimes almost a bigger problem than men, because women raise the children. We teach our children to perpetuate old stereotypes. So dowry is certainly an issue. It's a big reason why why families prefer males. Even when there's no obvious dowry, there's so many expenses, you know, the weddings, first delivery. There's also all the other issues of, like I mentioned before, culture, religious beliefs that, you know, woman is inferior to man. There's a fear of safety when raising daughters. There's also this fear, especially in India, you find it commonly in the lower socioeconomic strata, where they feel that they have to continue having a child until they have a boy, because a woman will be married off and they will not be able to take care of parents when they're old. So we must keep on having children until we have a boy. You know, they will not agree to postpartum sterilization, the little procedure after delivery, until they have a male child. So, I mean, it's a difficult question to discuss because as a doctor, this isn't really a medical problem per se. But I think the solution is not just in enforcing legislature. You need to have a change in the mindset of people, that respect has to come. That discrimination in our mindset needs to change. Yeah.
Right, like you rightly said, I think not just legislature, because I think there are laws that are actually governing people, that clearly says that women have the right to inheritance, women have the right to inheritance of ancestral property, and a lot of other legislative changes. But the mindset change has not really happened.
Yeah.
So I hope we can all work towards that.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next question, Dr. Priya. It is commonly believed that women are emotional in nature and go through mood swings and are swept away by negative emotions. Some people even think that this is because of certain hormonal functions in a woman's body, or even the way our brain works. How far do you think this is true? And is this something that we as women can do to ensure that things like this do not affect our personal life or productivity at workplace?
Yeah, I mean, not to offend anyone, but I think that this question itself kind of demonstrates a lot of the problem with people, with how society views women. First of all, I think that emotions, both positive and negative, they're there in every human being, because emotions are thoughts, and without thoughts, we're not alive. Studies done by psychologists and psychiatrists have shown that women are both equally emotional. Being emotionally unstable just means that we're not able to control these thoughts or emotions. And again, I don't think this is anything specific to men or women. The difference, I think, is that women and men deal with this lack of control differently. Women express themselves versus men who kind of suppress their emotions and shut everything down. And actually, studies have shown that suppression is the major cause of a lot of problems in society, both for men and women. And if you look at suicide rates worldwide, there are only 2 countries in the entire world that the male to female ratio is less than 1, which basically means other than 2 countries worldwide, more men, the suicide rates are higher for men than females, because this suppression is a cause of mental illness, and people are asked to go for counseling, And what one of the main aspects of counseling is to help release these pent up emotions. And people pay huge amounts of money for this. Amma gives the example about in the olden days, we all have emotions and stress and we need to release it. But women, they used to go to the puja room. Amma talks about her mother. They would go to the puja room and cry in front of the deity and kind of release their sadness. Whereas men would try to suppress it or forget it by turning to alcohol or other kind of addictions. So clearly you can see that one is potentially healthier. One option is potentially healthier than the other. Now, this brain physiology and hormones and all that has been that's been scientifically disproven, because hormones are not the cause of emotions. Emotions come from the mind. Hormones, to some small extent, may cause temporary instability or increased, we might jump to conclusions, increase a little bit more like lack of control. But certainly hormones cannot increase emotions. In fact, there is a whole concept of neurosexism, which is basically, it is a set of researchers who are insistent on finding out that there's some difference between the brain of a man and women. They have to do that, and they're called neurosexists. And the thing is that no study has been able to really show a significant difference in the brain, especially in children. There's very little difference, but there's an interesting school of thought where as women reach adulthood, some subtle differences occur, but these differences are more culturally influenced. So what they've come to say is that the external world can actually influence, our thoughts can actually influence the physiology of our brain. It's called a Ripon's thesis on the impact of a gendered world on the human brain. It's very fascinating. But I mean, if you look at it from before, women were always the source of strength and stability in a family. They were not considered as emotionally unstable. I mean, even if you go back to animals, in the animal kingdom, it's always the female that is the leader of any pack. From insects to lions, monkeys, elephants, it's always the animal it's always the female that is the key to survival. It's the same even if you look through history. So many powerful women, so many scripturally and historically. So this female helplessness syndrome is kind of an intentionally created stereotype that's kind of based on literature and TV. It's man-made. And men paint this picture of, the damsel in distress, scenes of female weakness leading to romance. There's a YouTube fad where these reality channels, the wife will fake pain or sadness or neediness to see if their husband will show them affection. So it's like this deep subconscious tendency to behave needy to get attention. And that's created. It's a stereotype that's created. And like you brought up the point of, does this affect productivity? I mean, so many studies have shown women in the workplace are more productive than men. A huge study by University of California said, I think some 65% of women will complete a task versus 40% of men. I mean, it's not about numbers, but basically whether you look at workplace or family, productivity doesn't come down. And even in families, like when you look at causes of divorce today, one of the leading causes of conflict in marriage is lack of communication. That's because you don't express or you don't share what is being felt inside. Because a lot of times men are taught that to be a man means you should not show your emotions. Right. So certainly I think that a lot of the points brought up in this question are more of just adding to the stereotype rather than really having any kind of factual basis in them.
Right. I think what you said sums it up. This is a misconception that is very commonly there, prevailing in the society, and that's why this question was brought up. But like you rightly answered, I think women are very, very productive and are more likely to finish a task that is given to them.
Exactly.
Because we have a tendency of being very, very sincere towards everything that we do, right? Whether it's motherhood, whether it's being a wife, whether it's being a daughter, a sister. So I think that
Yes.
reflects in other aspects of professional life as well. According to research done a couple of years ago, 60% of women are malnourished in Indian villages as well as in economically weaker sections of the society in urban areas. In case of malnourished young women or young girls, it has been seen that it not only affects their health, but also affects the future generations. Dr. Priya, how do we address this issue at a grassroots level?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for people living in upper to middle class society, middle to upper class society, a balanced diet is something that's quite well understood. You know, it's less processed foods like sodas and processed snacks, and a balanced diet like enough protein and fresh vegetables, vitamins, good fats, controlled amounts of rice and wheat and other kinds of carbohydrates. But I mean, I don't think that's exactly the issue here, because when you talk about 60% of women are malnourished, we're talking about impoverished areas. And in the Indian scenario, that's a huge issue, because an
Right,
undernourished
right.
girl becomes an undernourished mother, who then gives birth to a low birth weight baby. And this kind of perpetuates an intergenerational cycle of malnourishment. And this is often compounded by the fact that women become mothers very young in their adolescent age, where they have not yet fully developed. Also, sometimes they have very frequent pregnancies, which doesn't give them a chance to kind of nutritionally replenish themselves. And in all these situations, malnourishment continues. Um, I think it's also, there's another more subtle aspect to it, because it's not like people in the villages are unaware of how to eat healthy. Amma used to explain how her mother, Amma, was born in a fishing village that was quite impoverished in southern Kerala. And her mother used to find very innovative ways, kind of very with a lot of understanding of the local indigenous food sources. She would find all kinds of ways to supplement her children's health. But that being said, women always take a back seat in everything voluntarily. Like Amma would explain how families ate in the olden days. If there was like fish would be made, and they would make a big pot of fish curry or whatever, and the men would take all the middle pieces, the fleshy pieces that have the nutrition, and if at all there would be a little bit of tail or head pieces left over. And if that wasn't there also, there was no complaint. They would just eat a little bit of sauce on the with the rice and be done with it. So it's that tendency of the woman to just want to nourish so much so that they don't necessarily think of themselves. You know, Amma gives this example of women, of the little children that come to Amma's room for lunch sometimes, and she explains how the little boys, 4 or 5 years old, they take their little plate, they eat and they leave. But the girls, maybe a 4-year-old girl will immediately take the 2-year-old child, put her on the lap, and feed the 2-year-old child. So that inherent instinct to feed somebody else first, I think that also is one of the big problems. So unless everybody in the family also shows an interest to make sure that the woman is nourished, a woman alone understanding what is a good diet, I don't think it's going to help anything. I mean, then from the legislation aspect, there are so many programs that try to increase awareness of diet. Simple things like, for women in the villages, deworming, something so simple, but people don't tend to do it. Vitamins during pregnancy, using iodized salt instead of regular salt, access to proper healthcare during your prenatal and antenatal period, calcium supplementation, vitamin A supplementation. And these are all things that are kind of available, and the government is doing a lot. Individual organizations, including our own in the village projects, are doing a lot about it. But I think from an individual point of view, which is important for all of us listening, it should also be about everybody ensuring that the woman is nourished as much as the man, because at the end of the day, the next generation comes from the woman. So that's very, very important.
Right, Dr. Priya, that was very, very insightful. I think that is some perspective that we do not have an insight on, right? The innate tendencies of
Yeah.
women to just give and not think about themselves.
Yeah.
So, moving on to our live questions. So the first question comes in. From Nisha from Jaipur. So she says, globally, women make up 70% of the healthcare workforce and are more likely to be frontline health workers, such as nurses, midwives, community healthcare, sanitation workers, etc. How do we build a safety net for the well-being of the frontline workers during pandemics, such as the recent COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very pertinent question right now, because like you mentioned, this disparity has become really obvious during the COVID pandemic. I mean, it's sad. To begin with, why are we even worried about women being the majority of the frontline workers, 70%, as you mentioned? The thing is that women already, they shoulder so much of the work at home. So when COVID came and hit, schools were closed. So childcare, not only childcare, even the child's education, it'll always fall on the shoulders of the mother. Then to add to that, you have care of dependents at the home, in your home. That also is always going to be left to the woman. And then even in the workplace, when it comes to like leave, in spite of all these added responsibility, less leave is granted to women, because there's this automatic assumption that women are going to take more leave, and that bias kind of leads to less consideration for a woman's overall job responsibility. And it's truly unfortunate that parenting is not considered as a full-time job. On a corporate point of view, its importance is grossly minimized. The thing is that every future society depends on its mothers. But we live in a world where raising children is not factored into a person's time or productivity. Apart from just this aspect of women having so much more work, they were found to have much higher risk of job and income loss. And then we all heard about the increased risk of violence and exploitation, abuse, harassment that happened during the times of crisis and quarantine. And it was sad because when women actually did try to stand on their own 2 feet and financially support themselves and their family by starting small independent businesses, those businesses received less financial support than businesses developed by men. So altogether, it's a very pathetic situation. But I guess some of the things from a legislature point of view, at least, that we could do to protect these workers is, one thing that's very poorly developed in India is childcare options for working parents. It's there, rules state in the Company Act, you have to have all childcare facilities have to be provided, but none of this is actually, a lot of it is not actually enforced. No emphasis is given on it, I think, because previously there was the whole joint family concept. So there was always somebody at home to take care of the child, which is true. That's probably the safest way to go about it. But as urbanization and nuclear families increase, this problem of having no childcare is going to be a rising issue. The other aspect would be to consider giving some kind of financial support to female workers who need to take leave. And also any employer that does have a system of providing female workers with paid leave should also get financial subsidies, because you should go both ways.
Right.
Also, I think a culture of promoting some kind of arrangement where for the workers, family responsibilities is very important. And that again comes down to the same underlying problem, is that there's just no mutual respect. And unless that respect is increased, it's very difficult to change all these problems.
Right. So you've covered a lot of things in this, but I think the underlying thing is that companies, families, everybody supports each other during such difficult times. That is the only way to ensure well-being of women, especially
Exactly.
during COVID.
Yeah.
So the next question comes in from Maitli from Amritapuri, and she asks, due to the influence of the fashion industry, movies and TV, we see youngsters and girls following a ton of diet routines that make up for unrealistic body standards. As a doctor, what is your take on this?
Yeah, it's a good question. Objectification of women is a huge problem. We're so focused on looks, and it's peer pressure also that forces the woman to get into those kind of negative habits. But I think from the medical standpoint, there are two aspects to weight loss. One is diet and the other is exercise. And diet, as we discussed before, it needs to be a very balanced diet, because a lot of people think that the easier way out is just to restrict food. They are so desperate to fit in or to look a certain way that they feel that it's easy to just cut out food. But I think that the emphasis on exercise as a way of healthy weight loss needs to be emphasized versus trying to just reduce diet. I think one problem which I've always noticed is that in India, exercise is a little difficult for women compared to the West. Even if you talk about going running or jogging in the morning and wearing jogging pants, there are many places that will consider that as it's not appropriate dress, it's not appropriate this or that.
Yeah.
So that's an unfortunate aspect of exercise for women in India. But also, I think, just to say in this forum, that unhealthy dieting, which can also be like a form of illness. Many people may have heard about anorexia, which is where you overstarve yourself to a point of severe physical malnutrition and mental exhaustion. And then the another type of eating disorder, bulimia, where you binge eat, you overeat, and then when nobody else is around, you force yourself to vomit out everything because you're so afraid that you're going to gain weight because of what you're eating. I mean, it's not uncommon. Like in the West, at least people are open to talk about these problems, but in India, these problems are very real, but people don't want to talk about it. I've witnessed it in my own OPD. When mothers bring the child, they say, this girl is vomiting. When you evaluate and you find out that it's bulimia, they immediately want to find another doctor. They want endoscopies to be done. They want all kinds of tests to be done. They wanted to be admitted, CT scan, that is. But the moment you say those words, they'll find another doctor. So I think socially, I think it's all of our responsibility to kind of increase the awareness that it's not only about, certainly we need to practice healthy weight loss habits if we are planning to or trying to lose weight, but it's also about understanding that there's often a fine line because of that lack of discrimination between what is actually healthy and what becomes pathological. And we should have that openness to be able to discuss it, because a problem, it's always real. And unless we treat it as real, there'll never be a solution. Yeah.
Right. So our next question comes in from Vandana from Delhi. She says, with the rising costs in various sectors, healthcare is also becoming very expensive. How do we ensure that healthcare can be made affordable for women belonging to economically weaker sections of the society?
Okay, well, I mean, in a country like India, that's a third world country, ensuring healthcare to any weaker section of the society is a huge challenge, be it women, men, children, whoever it is. And coming from a healthcare background, there's a lot of discussion on how to reduce healthcare costs. And there's a lot actually in India we have to be proud of, because we have achieved a lot in reducing costs. Yet, this discussion really needs to go side by side with discussions on how to increase the population's capacity to pay for healthcare in the long run, because you're never going to necessarily be able to reduce healthcare costs to an extent that the poor people can pay. So I think Amma talks about this a lot, but one of the most important aspects I think to consider here is that women need to be made the financial head of the family. And I think when women are made the financial head of the family, then healthcare automatically will be given a preference. There will be proper rationing of resources. And that's something that I think we minimize the importance of when we try to look at this issue of people not being able to pay for healthcare. Amma talks about the example of giving a cow to a woman to as a source of income versus giving the same cow to the male member, where the woman will use the cow in 10 different ways and will be able to save money for future need, whereas the man will just make whatever money immediately required, and the rest goes for his own personal sources of enjoyment. So this is a big issue, and I think that I see it a lot as a doctor. I deal with a lot of alcoholics, working in gastro medicine, and you see these young men coming in their 30s and their 40s, and they have very bad liver disease, and they're no longer able to work. They're almost bedbound, and these women who previously were just quote unquote housewives, they suddenly become the only earning member in the family, and that transformation in them is just, it's nothing short of miraculous. They suddenly they become the single reason for the survival of that family. They have innovative ways of generating income. They educate their children, they care for the home, they care for their in-laws. At the same time, they remain dedicated to their husband's health till the end of his life. They plan out their finances. It's incredible. They don't succumb to stress as much. It's not that they're not stressed, but they don't seek methods to forget their problems. You don't see, at least in India, you do not see women falling into addictions as commonly at all. I mean, literally, it's they talk about women being a manifestation of Devi. You literally see them becoming like little Durga Devis in their own individual way to save their family. And I think that making women, Amma prioritizes that. Even in Amma's projects, the pension schemes are all given to women. Amma's Amrita Shri project is all about financing women so that they can then self-finance other women, and they become these individual, independent financial groups. And so, although I know the question was about healthcare, but changing healthcare costs, we won't ever be able to charge less to women. That's probably, it's unlikely to happen. But giving women the decision-making power in financing, because now everything is going to become insurance driven in the next 20 years.
Right.
So this
right.
gradual ability to save in order for our future health, I think women will do a much better job of that than men potentially. Yeah.
Right. I think that was very insightful, Dr. Priya. As long as women are made the head of the financial responsibilities, are at least outsourced, even if the woman is not an earning member, if the husband can hand over the finances to the woman, I think she'll do a much better job at allocating resources, right? I even remember my mother telling me that my father, as soon as he started working, I think they were married at 26 or something. My mother was 22, and my dad would get all his salary and give it to my mom, and she was supposed to allocate resources and handle finances, and they never had any issues, by God's grace, by Amma's grace, of course. But I think that is a good way of going about things in the future.
Exactly. I think it was the same in my family also. I don't think my father had any say about any of it, in the sense that he just passed it on, knowing that my mother would do a better job of it than him. Yeah.
The next question that has come in live from Divya from Bangalore. She says that the government has done a commendable job in providing food supplies and other essentials as part of ration. But don't you think we also need to look at this through a gender lens and include essentials for the well-being of women, such as sanitary pads, personal hygiene-related products, etc.?
Yeah, this is an extremely critical issue right now. I mean, I think it really came into the limelight when, what was that movie? Was it Padman? When Padman came out. And I think it was the first time that at least a lot of people saw quite saw just how bad it is in a lot of parts of India. It's sad because I think statistics show that more than 3/4 of Indian girls, they don't have any awareness about this whole concept of menstruation before it starts. And when it does finally happen, the experiences people say, it's like they're filled with shame, they're filled with fear and agony, and they're not told why all this happens. They're in fact, there was a study in Tamil Nadu where they asked schoolgirls who had started their periods what is wrong with them, and I think more than 80% of them said they have a disease.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about it. The reason why there is propagation of species is considered as a disease. And even as the girls get older, this stigma it stays with them. And it so much so that people don't want to think about it. They don't want to talk about it. To think that, 40% of schools in India have no toilets for girls is just, it's heartbreaking to think about that. And according to the movie that had come out, and just so many overwhelming number of studies show that almost 90% of women in India still use all these homemade products, the same rags that they clean the dishes or the floor, they'll set them aside after the cloth is too old to use for that, and then they use it as a rag when they have their periods. And even the thought of the disposable pads that you and me take it for granted are some kind of an aspirational sign of freedom from sorrow for these girls in the village. And use of these unhygienic sanitary products has huge number of health risks. There is a significant risk of sometimes life-threatening reproductive tract infections, and like we discussed before, it affects the fertility as well as the nutrition of that entire group of women. And that malnutrition, that poor health is perpetrated through the generations. And to add to this, it's that set of society that have the higher birth rate. So it's those women that need to have even more health, or at least equal health to anybody else. So like you mentioned, definitely if the government were to really create a very robust network to provide women's essentials, sanitary pads and other personal hygiene products, it would obviously be helpful to improve the health of women, but I think it would also go a long way in reducing that stigma behind menstruation, and it would give people permission to talk about it. We saw even in that movie how much difference one person was able to make. Amma also has these Saukyam pad production where they try to provide women with reusable pads. But I think, just before I end this question, that I think as women, we all have an individual responsibility to that lower socioeconomic group of women, not only in India, but all over the world, that we should make the first step in talking about it. I know some doctors who actually ask the men in the consultation room to leave before they speak to women about their periods.
Okay.
It doesn't make any sense. Like, why are we shy to speak about it? There's no shyness in speaking about other biological functions. So I think from our individual standpoint, to just increase the discussion will go a long way. It's like Amma talks straight on, open about all these issues. And I think we all should follow in that example. And that will hopefully make it all more socially acceptable. Yeah.
Right, Dr. Priya. So this brings us to an end to our session and the questions that's come in live. Thank you, Dr. Priya, for pouring your heart out for what you believe and for sharing insights as a doctor.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for being here. We hope that all of our audiences would have really benefited from your shares, and thanking you once again. So there is no limit to what we as women can accomplish. So let's aim for the sky and fly high. Last but not the least, thanking all our viewers for being with us through this session. Please follow and subscribe to our YouTube channel to be notified for upcoming sessions. Till then, signing off, Team Ayudh.